is our history wall at NSF, and if you've been there, you'll know that we're in a new building in Alexandria, Virginia. And the history wall is when you first come into the lobby. It's this gorgeous history of NSF and all of its discoveries. We have a very noble mission. Can everyone hear me and see the slides okay? Okay, and so I like to talk about all that we have done and make sure that you kind of understand who we are and what we do. So 94% of the funds that are appropriated for us travel through us out to you all, to your universities and colleges. And so we're very proud of the fact that only a very small amount stays at NSF for our own salaries, our own travel, our own business. And as you can see here, this year is the first year we hit the $8 billion mark. Yay, NSF, go NSF. And so this is an appropriation from Congress. We're very, very happy about that. And we now have 236 Nobel Prize winners who have received earlier in their careers funding from NSF. So that's a great number. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about NSF's 10 big ideas or the Convergence Accelerator. That's another talk, another day, another time. But I just want to say to you, there are 6 new research ideas, 4 what we're calling enabling ideas that close gaps. And if you don't know about NSF 2026, or if you don't know about NSF Includes, or Harnessing the Data Revolution, make sure that you Google NSF's 10 Big Ideas on the NSF website and make sure that you understand what's going on. Because this is really a big deal for us. As you can see here, the director of NSF, France Cordova, saying that these are bold questions that will drive NSF's long-term research agenda. Questions that will ensure future generations continue to reap the benefits of fundamental science and engineering. Okay, so here we go. We're going to start that ride. Here are our merit review criteria. Very simple. Not a lot of words, right? But as you know, this is a topic of great interest, not only to NSF, but to our board, the National Science Board, and to Congress. We had 11 criteria back in 1974, down to 4. We officially changed from peer review to merit review. Ask me later why. It was 1996 that we finally settled on 2, and we've kept those, you know, for several decades. Yay, that's great. Some stability. And then we had to establish accountability around that broader impacts criterion. I always say that when I first came to NSF in 1998, the program directors were still putting in their signature blocks, if you do not write about broader impacts in your proposal will be returned without review. Because people thought, oh, I don't need to write about broader impacts. Well, guess what? We are taking it seriously. Yes, you do. Today, of course, we don't return without review. Today, you can't even submit the proposal to NSF. If you do not put something in that text box, it will be rejected. You can't submit. Okay, and then we archive these 5 broader impacts criteria. I bring that up because I'm going to use them in the analysis. A, they're very clear, they're a small number, and they're kind of comprehensive. But remember, American Competes came along with 8 categories. National Science Board produced a report talking about policy, new guidelines. Our PAPG now has 9 broader impacts categories. And then, of course, AICA 7. Okay, so if you're not confused about broader impacts or you wonder why anyone would be, you now know why, right? Because we have all of these. So I just want to go over AICA because I'm going to do some analysis based on these categories. Economic competitiveness, health and welfare of the public, national defense, partnerships, big deal this time around in the data, STEM workforce, pre-K through grade 12, STEM and education, teacher development, undergraduates, improving public science literacy, engagement with science and technology in the U.S., expanding participation of women and individuals from underrepresented groups. And then I want to remind you of the archive ones, because again, I'm going to show you some analysis. Advancing discovery, while in the red, training graduate students, mentoring postdocs, and junior faculty involving undergraduates, and all the rest of this stuff. Broadening participation again, enhancing infrastructure and research and education. No mention of that in AICA. Broaden dissemination to enhance scientific and technological understanding. Benefits to society. Creating startups, improving commercial technology. Okay, so there are differences in all of these categories. You do not need to memorize these, but just to point out, in the original ones that are archived, we have this mention of graduate students. But in AICA, there is no mention of graduate students in any of those categories. And so when they were writing AICA, I do not know what happened. They usually contact us at NSF and say, have we included everything? But they didn't. Also, no research infrastructure is included. Okay, the PAPG tries to be comprehensive. If you look at that, the most recent one, and it has all of them, which is not to say that you can't even do more than what's in this list. We just want to make sure that it's inclusive. Okay, and then I've done this nice little chart here. You can't read this, but that's okay. You just need to know that I've got here the archive list, CAPEATS, AICA, the PAPG, and there's kind of a similarity. I said there's differences before, but across these 5 major ones in the archived group, and very high level, I'm saying that all of that work on students, STEM, pre-K through 12, and broadening participation, you can think about that, about building human capital. All of the work on infrastructure, research infrastructure, new tools, data archives, technological capital. Disseminating the work, mobilizing the knowledge, pushing it out there into the regions, being on radio shows, increasing the cultural capital of your region, your area. And then finally, benefits to society, that national defense, economic competitiveness. And we're going to talk a little bit about these. So I do have a new model, and so you can completely disagree with this novel because I'm not really quite yet conceptualizing it perfectly, and so I'd be happy to have conversations. But this is a little bit of a seashell thing that I'm going to build out, and what I'm arguing is that the broader impacts that our PIs focus on are those that are closest to their project, to what they're actually doing. Makes sense. They're submitting that budget. In that budget, there's budget lines for students. There's budget lines for travel, right? And so this is all part and parcel of what they do in the project. And so building that human capital, including their students in that research, in that project, is close to their hearts, right? Thinking about broadening participation, everyone is talking about it, as you're going to see in the data. Technological capital, that research infrastructure, putting out the data, putting out the new tools, making sure that your community has that, is a little bit harder to do. It takes a little bit of money. You need websites. You need to think about sustainability. If you put it out there, make it available. Cultural capital, really disseminating the knowledge that you have created in your project, much, much harder. So kind of further out from that kernel. Okay, and then societal benefits. Those are the hardest, right? Because you're proposing to do something in 2019, and so you're going to say in your proposal, and I'm going to change the world with this project. Just give me, $350K, and I am going to do the greatest things on the earth. Well, guess what the reviewers would say? Well, who do you think you are? Why are you going to change the world? And so it's pretty hard to make the case in a proposal that you're going to have these big societal impacts. And so it's no surprise, really, that that's really further out. Okay, so we know that broader impacts are important because there's always been more proposals coming to NSF, 50,000 a year, and we make 11,000 or so awards, right? About a 23% success rate, and so we have to figure out how to make the decisions that balance our portfolio, and so broader impacts is one of the ways that we do that. We also know that clear criteria and making broader impacts increasingly clear is so important to the PIs and also to the reviewers. I mentioned accountability, and so it is critical at every step of the way. This is our traditional merit review process graphic. Up at the top, we've got what the PI is doing at your university. In the middle, kind of what NSF is doing. And then at the bottom there, kind of what our Division of Grants and Agreements is doing. And every step of the way, you can't submit the proposal for your PI if it doesn't have broader impacts. It has to be in the review, or the review will be rejected. It has to be part of the panel summary, or the program director will say to the reviewers, go back and do this. And it has to be in the review analysis. This is the key document that program directors write up to summarize their recommendation. And if it's not in that, the division director will say, rewrite this. I won't accept this, right? So all along the way, there has to be broader impacts spelled out, why it's significant. And of course, at the end of the day, we have committees of visitors, right? And so these come every 4 or 5 years, typically at the division level, sometimes at the program level, if it's a very, very broad cross-cutting program. Generally, we have great comments from our committees of visitors. You should find out who at your university has sat on these committees of visitors. They actually get to, take back the lid of the hood of NSF and really look in there, and they see the actual dossiers, and they're usually incredibly impressed with the degree to which program directors think about every single one of those proposals that have come to them. But also, every single COV, we know there's always something about those broader impacts. And so in other presentations, I've actually given you comments, actual real comments from the COVs saying how confusing they are. They're different for everything. And that's because when you're looking at a division, you've got core programs, you've got cross-cutting programs, you've got REU sites, you've got career, you've got workshops, you've got IGRs, you've got raises. And so the way that broader impacts is handled is not going to be the same because they're different scale, different scope, different solicitations necessitating different things. Shouldn't be surprised there's heterogeneity, but the COVs are every single time. We see a knowledge base emerging, and I'm just thrilled with this, right? So people actually writing, we have histories of the merit review at NSF. You folks have contributed with all of the things that you have done, and so I probably need to update this with your latest, greatest writings. And so it is so important that we actually put this out there, what we're learning, what we know, and make it available for everyone. Okay, so here we go into the actual data. Now, so I'm stopping here. You need to look at the legend. I'm going to be very, very slow on this first one so you grasp what's going on. Okay, so in the legend, it says investment type. And you're going to see that there are 3 of them at NSF. So this is at the agency level, right? Project summary. Who writes the project summary? The PI. And it says fiscal year 2014 award. So this is data from 2014. And this is all I've ever shown you in all these 4 years is 2014 data. And guess what? I have today with me 2018 data. Woohoo! Which is, I'm going to show in the next slide. We're going to be surprised a little bit, but maybe not so much, and maybe happy that there aren't that many changes. But it's really important that we have these snapshots over time over how our communities are really responding to broader impacts. Okay, and then we have at the top of these little colors, we have the 5 archived. Again, I like to start there because they're so broad and I think very understandable. Okay, so first investment type. Now remember, these are the PIs. What they're writing is research, right? Second one is education. And the third one is research infrastructure. So everything that we do at NSF is divided for every directorate, every division, into these 3 categories. So research is what you can imagine. Education are those programs that are not research, typically intervention and evaluation. And so these data do not have EHR in them, but they are all the education programs across all the directorates, whether it's in engineering, computer science, where they're not asking the proposers to do research. Research infrastructure, not research. They're going to build something. This is MRI programs. This is the Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure, many of their programs. Again, not research. So these are orthogonal categories. But what do you see? So I'm going to help you out with these colors because I'm used to them and you're not. For many of you haven't seen them in a year. But this blue at the bottom, that is the preponderance, that light blue at the bottom, that is advancing discovery while training your students. So I'm just going to say this is about students and in all areas, undergraduates, graduates, postdocs, it's about students. Okay, so you can see 50%, 54, 37%. Preponderance of what the PI is writing about in the project summary is about their students, bringing up the next generation. Okay, I'm going to hop up to the gray. That's broadening participation, right? And so that's 13, 17, 14.9, 15%, right? And so if you add broadening participation and the light blue at the bottom together, across the board in every category, in every investment type, over 50% of the proposals coming to NSF, their broader impacts are primarily being written about the next generation of scientists and engineers, what they're going to do in their project, right, to bring up and mentor the students. Now, don't ask me how well they do that. So, you know, how well they're mentoring, that's a question for us all to ask. Okay, and then you can see here up at the top, enhancing infrastructure, 14.5, 12, 13% for education. And as you would expect in that category that's not research, not education, 28% of the broader impacts is talking about how they're going to enhance infrastructure, how they're going to develop new tools, how they're going to develop archives, how they're going to spread that around. So as you can imagine. And that dissemination, that little yellow bar, not so much. Orange bar, benefits to society, 11, 8, 11, not so much, right? Okay, so now let's move to 2018. So again, this is the PI, but now this is all that happened last year. This is the actual data from last year. Same categorization scheme, same 3 investment types, research, education, research infrastructure, and what do we see? Almost the exact same thing, right? We're seeing this preponderance of a focus, that light blue at the bottom, that gray for broadening participation. So students in broadening participation, always over 50%. You see that research infrastructure, again, they're actually talking about in those proposals about how they're going to handle their data, their new tools, how they're going to give access, all of that kind of thing. Okay, so now let's go to the reviewers. So now this is what the reviewers are saying in the panel summaries, not the PIs. Same whole schema, right? Research, education, research infrastructure. But this is the reviewers. Okay, it's pretty much the same thing, right? And so over 50%, lower blue, gray is focused on students, focused on human capital. That top, enhancing infrastructure, is still there, but that yellow is a little bit bigger. The dissemination, spreading the results, the mobilization of the knowledge, putting knowledge into action, a little bit bigger for the reviewers. This is 2014. 2018, research, education, research infrastructure, and again, almost the exact same thing. I know, so I'm not going to repeat it, but over 50%, a little bit of enhancing infrastructure, and the reviewers are saying a little bit more about dissemination than are the PIs. And then we did this difference. This is using one of my computer scientists' weirdness algorithm. And this is looking at the differences between, at the top, what the reviewers are saying in the reviews, and at the bottom, what the PIs are saying in their project summary for the same year, 2014, and for these same 3 categories. And so what we saw in this is that the reviewers were talking a lot more about broadening participation and dissemination than were the PIs. The PIs were spending more time talking about their students, talking about the benefits to society of their work, and enhancing infrastructure. Okay, not so clear in 2018. So again, that same difference. Up at the top, we've got what the reviewers are writing in the panel summaries. You all have seen these panel summaries. I'm sure you help your PIs go through them. Okay, at the bottom, we're talking about what the PIs are saying. And so, again, similarity. The reviewers are talking about dissemination. That yellow bar, that was a little bit bigger for reviewers than it was, right? So if, for those of you who have not seen these before, if all the bars were right at 0, it would mean that the PIs and the reviewers were in the same preponderance talking to those broader impacts. When you see the bars go up, it means that that group is spending a lot more time in their documents writing about that than the other groups. So reviewers spending time on dissemination and enhancing infrastructure. And so it's interesting to keep this in mind, that enhancing infrastructure really includes a lot of the partnerships that we've been developing over the years, and that's kind of a new thing that's important. So this is really a new thing for reviewers, and so write this down if you want to write notes to yourself. This is important. So somehow, and it's going to be seen even more vividly in a few more slides, right, that the reviewers are picking up that NSF wants to really develop partnerships, and if that's they're not making up things that aren't in the proposal, but if there's something in there, they're really bringing that up as trying to make an argument to NSF. And so again, looking back at the PIs, you see advancing discovery to students is where the PIs are spending a lot of their time. And also broadening participation, interestingly, than are the reviewers, right? Okay, so let's move on and look at AICA, so a whole new categorization scheme, whole new way to slice and dice the data, because there's gaps, there's some overlaps, but not completely. And again, though, I'm looking at these same 3 investment areas. And so now I want you to look at the orange first. Okay, that is broadening participation. So that's the preponderance, again, regardless, right? And this is what the PIs are writing about. They're writing about, now there's no graduate students in the AICA categorization scheme, so there's no way that grad students could show up here. Undergraduates are showing up in this gray area that's called developing workforce. So again, though, we can say developing workforce and BP, that's the human capital development of my model, right? Closest to that kernel of the project, easiest for them to talk about. It's actually in their budget. They're getting money for this. And that's the preponderance. And look at these other ones. Isn't it amazing? The bottom, that little slice, is advancing health and welfare. At the top, it's public literacy. That little teeny tiny little green bar, National security, no one's writing about national security. And the yellow bar, economic competitiveness, a little bit, but not very much. Industry participation is that kind of royal blue in the upper third, right? And that has, you know, in some cases, it's the third largest, this industry participation. Okay, so let's look at this exact same chart, but for 2018, most recently, this is last year, real-time data. It's kind of the same in the project summary. Again, it's broadening participation, orange, it's developing the workforce, gray, preponderance, not so much economic competitiveness, that industry participation, in some cases here, it's the third largest, and then tiny, tiny little green bars, and then public literacy, not so much. Okay, and now we're looking at the reviewers, again, same analysis from their point, what they're writing in the panel summaries. And so research, and so we had to spell this out. The little green bar got so little I couldn't even put numbers in it. And so tiny little green bar, 0.91% in education for national security, research infrastructure, same story, right? It's that human capital development is what we're talking about, and the other things, not so much. Okay, but look here for the AIC reviewers in 2018, and you see now that that industry participation, that royal blue, kind of in the upper third, 19%, 11%, 12%. And if I can just go back, so from 13% to 19%, from 4% to 11%, from 8% to 12%. Industry participation, right? That's the only place in the data where I'm seeing that the reviewers are doing much of anything different from what they've been saying in the past. Okay, so again, we've got our little weirdness algorithm that we're applying. We're back to 2014. We're looking at the top at what the reviewers are saying, at the bottom what the summaries or the PIs are saying. So top is the reviewers. Advancing health and welfare, interestingly, in the reviews. Broadening participation and developing the workforce. Again, this is the AICA, right? So, and then at what the PIs are talking about, economic competitiveness, industry participation, national security. This is back in 2014. Okay, and now we're looking at 2018, right? And you see that industry participation, it's kind of over to the right, not quite far right. And you see that the reviewers are now starting to talk. They picked that up as, oh, you know, we're in this era of flat budgets, right? We all need to work together, and isn't this important if the project is kind of talking about partners? And you see also advancing health and welfare, which is the same as before. Reviewers are talking about that. They're actually talking about how the research might contribute to the quality of life in this nation. Broadening participation is not so clear. Developing the workforce, it's the PIs seem to be talking about it. National security is mixed. Public literacy, the reviewers are talking a little bit more about that. Again, that's that far out in that model. You know, it's in that kind of cultural capital, really moving the knowledge out from that project out towards the community, out towards the region, the nation. Okay, and so this is an attempt to try to look at the differences among student groups, and meaning undergraduates, graduate students, and postdocs. I'm not sure how this shows up. This is a new slide, and I'm seeing it's kind of small. But and they're not all coming up, the legends. So let me tell you that the gray for 2014 is infrastructure. And so that is the investment type. And so if you're submitting an infrastructure proposal as a PI, you're most likely to talk about postdocs out of all those groups. If you're submitting something as an education program, you're most likely to talk about undergraduates, undergraduate research and student assessment. If you're most likely to be submitting a research proposal, you're talking about doctoral students, PhD students, the most. And then 2018, all those differences somehow have disappeared across the board except for student assessment, right? And student assessment has gotten huge in the education proposals. So this is what the PIs are writing about. And so my hypothesis there is that the solicitation demands in those education proposals that there be an excellent student assessment. You know, I think that I've seen that increasingly, and so that's where it's showing up. But across the board, there just aren't those differences that we were finding early on. Everyone is bringing in students across the board, would be my guess. Okay, now I'm moving to directorates, so bear with me. We're almost getting to a place where we can have some discussion here. So bio, size, EHR, engineering, geo, MPS, SBE. So you all know that you're dealing with some or all of the PIs, your faculty members. You know, they're going to submit to one or more of these directorates. So this is what the PIs are saying back in 2014, and we're back to the archived group. So now the blue at the bottom is the students, all categories of students. And so almost 50%, except for, look at SBE. Isn't SBE different and interesting? Right, so their orange bar, right, is the second. So they are talking about students at 33%. But look at that orange bar, benefits to society. 27% of the proposals submitted, the PI is talking about the benefits of their research to society. And I just find that so interesting, right? And geo, it's not quite as big as SBE, but 14.6% talking about benefits to society. My hypothesis is that the PIs know that they're under the gun, right, that are submitting to these directorates, and they have more of a need to justify their research than others implicitly are doing. So MPS, 4.2%, they don't need to justify their research, they think in their minds, right? No one's telling them to, no one's asking them to, right? And so it's just interesting that SBE has this very different spread across the students, the benefits to society, broadening participation, dissemination, and enhancing infrastructure. Looking at enhancing infrastructure, the bright blue at the top, isn't it interesting that size, 22%, right? But is that really surprising? They have an Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure. Guess what they're about? Enhancing infrastructure. Look at engineering, 16%. And geo and EHR, you know, they're all pretty close. They're not too far off. They're all thinking about infrastructure, but size is really a big deal. Okay, and now we're doing the exact same thing, 2018, last year, looking again at across all the directorates. And again, I want you to look at SBE because now 24%, right, of what's being written in all of the project summaries sent to SBE in 2018, we're talking about this benefit to society, somehow justifying that their research is important and going to have some benefit. Geo, 15%, the second. And interestingly, engineering also saying how their work is going to benefit. And the other, not so much, NPS, so 4%, right? But again, just like always before in the project summary, over 50% is human capital. Right, but what we're noticing are some other differences here. And then enhancing infrastructure, size again, 21%, engineering 17%, geo 15%, EHR 14%. So enhancing infrastructure, increasingly important to everyone. Okay, and now we're looking at the reviewers, the very, very same thing. It's very, very similar, except that that yellow bar, as before, dissemination, right? That's kind of further out. The reviewers like that dissemination issue, right? And so if they can see something in the proposal it looks like they're picking it up and putting it into their review, right? Again, my hypothesis is that they're making an argument to the program director that maybe this will give the project that I'm seeing here, that I've given a good grade, a better chance, because they're doing something above and beyond that core kernel. They really are trying to reach out. They really are moving beyond, right? So those are pretty big marks there for the reviewers. And again, let's look at 2018. Not so much, again, in 2018, kind of the same, but not really a big deal. But we do see enhancing infrastructure, again, for size, 22%, engineering, 16%, EHR and engineering, EHR and geo, kind of right up there. The same thing we see in SBE, 20% for benefits to society. But the next largest is engineering. Engineering is somehow arguing about these benefits to society. And so maybe my hypothesis is incorrect. Maybe it's not, because engineering is certainly not under attack. Okay, so back to 2014, weirdness algorithm applied. This is what we said. This is kind of the bottom line for that previous data analysis. The reviewers cared so much about broadening participation, those are the gray bars, across all the directorates, and dissemination, right? They care that the proposal is saying something beyond that tight kernel that maybe is helping them, right? As you know, the reviewers are the same, in the same research community as the PIs, right? And so you can imagine a reviewer coming in and saying, hey, wait a minute, you're collecting all these data and you're not going to make them available to our research community? You know, why is that? I want to have access to your data. Or you're developing these new tools, I want access. So really makes a lot of sense. For 2018, it's all over the map, right? And so again, I'm just getting, this is like hot off the press, not really quite sure how to think about this yet, but what we're seeing in the reviews for bio, size, engineering, geo, and MPS is students. The reviewers are talking about the students more than the PIs are. Huh? Well, I'm not sure how to explain it. I'm going to have to go in, and so I have the ability to extract text strings and to really start to analyze in a qualitative sense kind of what's going on here, except for EHR. So EHR, the reviewers are talking about benefits to society, well, sizes too, and MPSs, interestingly. And yellow, dissemination still, just like in the past. SBE, it is broadening participation that is the biggest, right? So SBE is currently caring a lot about that. Okay, so, so we're looking at the AICA project summary here. So we're looking at the PIs, right? And it's very, very similar to what I've said before. All these little numbers that are stuck in there in white are that national security thing, right? This is 2014, that blue, a third of the way up, the royal blue, kind of a big deal for size. This is industry. Engineering, 22%. And so again, though, human capital is the biggest issue here. 2018, very similar kind of thing. National security, interestingly, has increased a little bit. It's not that skinny, skinny bar anymore for size, EHR, and SBE. Isn't that interesting? So we have in the project summaries, PI saying, my work actually relates to national security. But again, human capital is the biggest deal. Okay, now we're looking at the panel summaries back in 2014. Little skinny green bars, human capital, the orange and the gray. The biggest deal, dissemination, is a little bit. 2018, kind of the same story, except industry participation, right? I mentioned that before. Size, 23%. Engineering, 31%. 23% or 24% to 31%. and engineering, where the panel reviews are talking about industry participation. Okay, so we're back to 2014, looking at the top at what the reviewers are saying, comparing the reviews to the summaries, the reviewers to the PIs, and we saw that for GEO and SBE in 2014, the reviewers were talking about advancing health and welfare to the nation. SBE was also, the reviewers were talking about public literacy and size and EHR, a lot of broadening participation. Okay, we moved to 2018, and again we've got advancing health and welfare almost across the board, and we've got this industry participation, in particular for EHR and engineering. Right, so someone was here from, Trish, I think your name was, if she's here, from Nebraska. Yeah, thanks, Trish. And so Jim Lewis made this really big deal about bringing money in from Boeing last year to really help develop online curriculum and helping the veterans to be reskilled. And so go back and tell Jim that his work is showing up in the data, right? Because look at EHR. I mean, so really thinking hard. And the reviewers really noticing that, right? Okay, so I'm going to just breeze through this because we're almost running out of time. But at one point, you all had asked me way back when, because the data that I just presented, all of it is awards, right? And you said, but wait a minute, you're not showing us declines. Is there something weird going on with the declines? And so we did every analysis. And if you just look at the bars, this is every directorate. This is 2014. This is the 5 archive. They track exactly. 2018, tracking exactly with the archive. If you look at the differences in the project summaries, differences between awards and declines now. So interesting difference. So you saw the EHR back in 2014, broadening participation. SBE was focused on benefits to society, right? That argument we were making back in 2014. 2018, you see size and EHR focusing in the awards on broadening participation, GEO on enhancing infrastructure, SBE broadening participation, and then in the declines on the bottom, so we've got the orange bar, benefits to society showing up in the declines, right? And so this is what the PIs are writing about. Okay, so now we're going to AICA. Again, they track across, right? Awards, this is awards and declines for every directorate, right? There's no big, huge differences. Awards and declines in 2018, no change. And so I guess we should be happy that we're not seeing huge, weird vacillations. And again, in 2014, when we looked at the differences between awards and declines, what showed up and what was the big deal last year in my talk was the reviewers are consistently talking about broadening participation and dissemination as compared to what what's happening in the decline, sorry. Okay, and then 2018, they are still talking about dissemination, big time. They're also talking about broadening participation and EHR benefits to society. In SBE, they're talking about students and enhancing infrastructure. But dissemination is a really big deal for reviewers. I'm not going to go through these comments, but I just, as I said, I can go through and pick out text strings that just show what the reviewers are saying in the panel summaries when they see that something is happening. They're saying, oh, this is going to go global. They're going to have a symposium. They're disseminating the results. They're releasing the data, right? The reviewers love to see that. In broadening participation, again, in the panel summaries, we're seeing not only is this a great project, but there's a couple of young investigators, or this is a great project and we have an emerging woman scientist. This is a great project and she has a track record of training students in underrepresented groups, on and on and on. So it's that not only is this a great project, but look at the broadening participation, the broader impacts that are going on here. It's huge. So let's move, my bet is that's the argument to move that up from recommended, say, to highly recommended. Okay, we're looking here just at declines in 2014, differences between reviews and project summaries. And so we see dissemination is huge in the reviews, and benefits to society, huge. These are all the declines. These are declines in 2018. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. And this is a ratio of ratios for 2014. At the top, it's greater discussion in award reviews compared to proposals. And at the bottom, it's greater discussion in decline reviews compared to proposals. And so this is that big story I made in last year about 2014 data, was that the reviewers are interested in broadening participation and dissemination, and the awards, and the declines are talking primarily about students. Okay, when we do this ratio of ratios in 2018, that clear story kind of goes away, and it's all over the map, right? Depending on which directorate you're in. Geo, it looks like benefits to society are huge. Right, in 2018, engineering benefits to society were huge. Size, it was dissemination. In bio, it's students, right? No clear story here. And then finally, the last kind of data here is the 10 big ideas. We just started funding them, but they're a little bit different, right? So we wanted to look to see if something was happening with the broader impacts in the 10 big ideas. So the 10 big ideas are farthest left, and there's nothing weird, nothing really completely different in the big ideas. And of course, we didn't have big ideas in 2014, so this is just 2018. And we're going to do a lot more analysis here. And in this, what the computer scientist who did this did, it's called remaining portfolio, but he took out the 10 big ideas before they were included in all those analysis out. And so you've got just orthogonal data. So it's 10 big ideas versus everything else in the portfolio. Again, no big differences. Okay, and then we looked at 10 big ideas versus an investment type for AICA. No big differences between the 10 big ideas on the left, tracking just the same. And the same kind of thing when you take out the big ideas and just have everything else that came in 2018, right? No big changes even when you use the AICA. No big differences, I mean. Okay, and then we looked at multi-directorate just to see if those were different. That's the furthest right. Again, no big differences. So this is just kind of a confirmation, and I'm sharing it with you. So people are submitting to core programs, they're submitting to big ideas, but the way broader impacts are being treated is not drastically different, whether you are the PI, whether you are the reviewers. Again, multi-directorate awards looking at AICA. And finally, we get out of the data and just get to say a few little things here. And that is, that I've hammered this over and over again. Human capital is the main target currently of broader impacts. When looking at the differences, in 2014, it was really PIs were focused on students, benefits to society, and research infrastructure. Reviewers were looking at dissemination and broadening participation. In 2018, it's all over the map. There's really significant differences amongst all those directorates. For the awards in 2014, again, broadening participation and dissemination. In 2018, we began to see the importance of the reviewers talking about industry participation. Okay, and so I want to go back to this just for a second, this core, the project, and talk about the evidence that we have just seen about how human capital is so closely bound. Technological capital, which is all of that which is where industry participation is, it's still part of what might happen in a project. And putting data out there or developing new tools, could be, these are products, right? And partnerships can help bring in and leverage dollars. But it's still a little further out. And it's still not a preponderance of what's happening. And that cultural capital, that kind of outward engagement. So I was at a breakout session this morning where there's this tool from the UK, EDGE tool, where it's kind of each institution can do its own assessment of how well they're doing outreach. It's a really interesting discussion because it's hard. We're seeing that's why it's out there. That's why they're not talking about the dissemination. That's why the reviewers pick it up and say, wow, they really are trying to do something. And then societal benefits, you know, national security, we don't really know what we're doing there. And so when we think about what this means, the core is human capital development, the periphery, the least focused are these benefits, right? And so all the categories are used, but some hardly ever. And so how do we help your community, the PI community, to better understand how their research might relate to national security or to economic competitiveness, and make it appropriate and not be so risky or outlandish or science fiction-y that the reviewers hate it, right? I mean, I think it's a real work that we could actually take on and figure out how to do. And so the PIs are using all the areas, but not evenly. The reviewers, again, I think that what they're talking about in the panel summary, what they're picking up on are the things that they think are going to be most influential back to the funder if they want to see that project funded. And so at the end of the day, we say how is important is broadening, broader impacts in the whole NSF merit review. And it's not a 50-50 proposition. We do not have scales. We do not have quantitative indexes at NSF. NIH and others do, right? Other countries sometimes look at the scientific merit first and then look at broader impacts, right? And so there's many other ways that we could think about this. But currently today we have this model at NSF. And instead, it seems to be what's most important is what is really appropriate for the size, the scope, the scale of that project, right? And the expertise. And so do you really want to give funding to an MPS, sorry to pick on MPS folks, to go out into middle school with their quantum computing curriculum if there's no body from education on the project? How are they going to develop curriculum? How are they going to know how to teach a module? How are they going to know to reach out? So it's not appropriate. The reviewers would not like that, right? And so it has to be appropriate for, you know, what's actually being proposed and who the proposers are and their capacity. Many open questions for us, the same open questions as every year that I've talked. How can we increase the understanding? And I do hope that by showing you the data, it grounds us. So it's important to remember, just because these are what the data say, this is not what NSF wants, right? We're not asking, we're not telling PIs go do this. You're telling PIs a lot of things, right? But yet they're sending proposals in about their students, mostly. And we're not telling reviewers, go write about dissemination or go write about industry participation. We give them broad instructions about broader impacts, right, this kind of appropriateness kind of thing, you know. And so, so we need to talk about what is it that we want to see in the future, right? And how much do we want to take up these new tools, like this EDGE tool that I saw this morning, to help us be able to do more outreach. I mean, if we have knowledge creation going on at our institutions, I mean, I would hope that it's being broadly shared, because I think that the competitiveness of your institution and of the nation depends on us broadly sharing all of that. And so I think we need to increase clarity. We need to have better guidance. Figuring out how to do that exactly is very difficult. And again, I really reach out to all of you. And so I really want to work with you on these collective impact models that you've been working on. And so I was at NORDUP earlier this week, and I kept saying, NABI this, NABI that. I know they got probably sick of me talking about NABI, but it was the first time I was at NORDUP. And so they are interested in talking with you all, and Susan has confirmed with me that you all are already like on the go. But I think one of the biggest things that I've heard that really is helpful is these regional meetings that you're having, so that it's not just you folks who can afford to come here and get all of this knowledge. So this is not an insider track for all of you, right? I come here because and tell you what we know, and we work together to think about what we want to change. But I think you're going to spread this, right, through your networks and in your regions to those small colleges and universities, tribal colleges, universities, HBCUs, HSI that aren't here, because we need to think about doing that and sharing the knowledge.